Right. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning into today's webinar hosted by the STEEP Superfund Research Program. Our webinar series, which focuses on PFAS on Cape Cod, is called Connecting Communities with Science for Solutions. I'm Laurel Schaider. I'm a senior scientist at Silent Spring Institute, and I co-lead the Community Engagement Core for the STEEP Superfund Research Program. STEEP stands for Sources, Transport, Exposure, and Effects of PFAS. We are funded by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. STEEP is led by the University of Rhode Island with researchers from Harvard and Silent Spring Institute. The goal for our webinar series is, our goals are to share findings from STEEP research with members of the Cape Cod community and broader audiences, to elevate the voices of community leaders on Cape Cod who are working to address the many challenges of PFAS, and to share examples from Cape Cod of how researchers and communities can work together to find solutions. I'll start with a few housekeeping items. Our speakers will take questions at the end after they've both presented. Please type your questions into the Q&A rather than the chat function. The audience will be muted the whole time, so if you have a question, please do type it into the Q&A. Today, I'm excited for our discussion with two great presenters, Dr. Emily Diamond, an associate professor at the University of Rhode Island. Emily and I together lead the Community Engagement Core for STEEP, and Jason Steiding, the director of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe's Department of Natural Resources. The Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe is a core community partner for our Community Engagement Core. Emily and Jason will be talking about a family of chemicals called PFAS. If you're here today, you've likely already heard something about these chemicals. If you're new to PFAS or would like a refresher, I'd recommend that you check out the STEEP or previous webinars. So today, our first speaker will be Jason Steiding. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Jason is a native Cape Codder and Eagle Clan member of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. In his role as Natural Resources Director for the tribe, he strives to protect the natural resources that have ensured the survival and well-being of his people since time immemorial, and to sustain these resources for the next 7 generations. In his role, Jason oversees all natural resource-related activities for the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, including fish and wildlife management, habitat protection and restoration, water resource management, food sovereignty, diadromous fish recovery, and tribal development and environmental policy analysis and implementation. And I'll add that Jason has been a terrific partner for our work over the past few years for the STEEP study, and I'm grateful to him for being here today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thanks, Laurel. And I do appreciate this opportunity. Thank you to STEEP and URI and everyone else. Going back about 3 years ago, I was introduced by a councilwoman, Edwina Graham. She had been working with folks from the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Council, specifically Cheryl Osimo. And I was approached. She wanted me to be involved and to meet Cheryl as well. And their work had centered around breast cancer awareness and risks. There was certain areas here on Cape Cod that were showing higher levels of breast cancer than what would be considered normal. So I was able to meet Cheryl. And at the same time, I did meet the folks from STEEP and URI. And that was the first time that I was exposed to PFAS or forever chemicals. I had never heard of them before, and most of the folks from our community had not. And from that started this partnership where these folks came to our community, and that's represented by this picture here. I think this might have been one of our first visits where they came down to our government center and met with us, and kind of laid out a map and a plan for how we could raise awareness of the risks that were associated with PFAS in our tribal community. And again, this was about 3 years ago, I'd say. And the relationship has just grown tremendously since then. Again, I had never heard of PFAS. No one from our community had heard of it. So some of the discussions at the time were, it was called the, if I'm not mistaken, the URI STEEP Community Engagement Core. And what they sort of proposed to do was to come into our tribal community, sit with tribal people, tribal members at every level, and get an idea of, what is your understanding of PFAS? What do you know about PFAS? and sort of work us through education and learning more about it and what the risks were associated with it. Um, and like I said, no one had heard of it. So we were trying to figure out ways to get creative and get the messaging out to our community. And it started with one-on-one interviews, and it was not an easy task. Um, these folks came to our community, they knocked on doors, they set up interviews in the building. They were all over Mashpee trying to set up these interviews, and a lot of times it was not easy. We had some advertising online that didn't go well as well, but it was sort of boots on the ground at first when we first started going. Um, but it ended up being pretty successful. They got a pretty good turnout over time, and we're able to just gauge people's knowledge of what PFAS were. And some of the questions were, how much fish do you eat, and that sort of thing, to just gain some basic understanding of what the knowledge was here at a tribal level. And as we moved on, we progressed, and we had a film screening and also a panel discussion, which this flyer indicates here. And that was held in our tribal community center gymnasium. It was well attended. It was well received. For many folks, it was their first exposure to PFAS. And they were able to hear a panel from not only myself, but the folks that you see on that flyer there about some of the work we were doing locally and the relationship that we had with the tribe. So, we're always looking to move forward. And as part of that, Steep and URI have been great. They're always looking for ways to evolve this relationship and get in front of our community members. So after this event, we talked of other ways to pass along the message. And these folks have been, again, coming to Mashpee on a regular basis these past 3 years. They've been involved with our community. They've been in our backyards, in our buildings, in our homes. And these are just a couple examples here. We had a Honor the Earth Fair 2 years back was our first one. It was basically an Earth Day event, and they attended that. They had a booth set up with information. Below corner, they're talking to Linda Coombs, who's a tribal member over in Martha's Vineyard. Top right corner, a few folks were at our powwow, which we have annually in July, and they had a booth set up there as well. Again, just to pass along the message, to speak to anyone who was interested, and to educate them as to what we were doing and give them details on our partnership. As we move forward, again, we're always trying to find creative ways to educate our community. It started out with these interviews, most of which were, adults, people in our government center building here, or in our community, or some of our fishermen. And we thought, well, why don't we start passing along some of this knowledge and some of this understanding to our kids, to our tribal children. And we run a 5-week summer science camp. It's called Preserving Our Homelands. It's for tribal students, middle school students aged 10 to 14. And we teach them Western science with a indigenous knowledge supplement, if you will, every day. And it's different teachings. So I think it was 3 years ago, the very first year that URI and Steve came to Mashpee. They took part in our POH camp, which you can see here. There were classroom teachings, and then we went outside and did some fun activities with the kids. This particular day, they were learning about bioaccumulation and how PFAS travels throughout the body, as you can see by those pictures of the kidney and lungs. The URI and Steve staff, I can't say enough. They took a lot of time to come up with some really great curriculum. This activity was very hands-on, as you can see the kids running down below. Well received by the kids, a lot of fun, a lot of time and effort went into planning this. So we were obviously very, very happy with the results and very encouraged to see the kids actually enjoying themselves. So that was just another example of our community engagement, which was great because now we had taken it to some of the younger kids. And again, what's so great about this partnership and what's been so great about it up to this point is that we're always being approached, and we're always being asked, what can we do better? What does the tribal community want to see? What more can we do? How many more avenues can we take? How many more fish can we sample? What's important to the tribe? And it's not just, them coming down and saying, oh, well, this is what we're going to do for you. And during those discussions, some of the things that came up were, we've got these rivers that are really important to us here in Mashpee, specifically the Santuit, the Mashpee, and the Quashnet rivers. They've got herring runs in all of them. Most of them have at one point had some pretty significant brook trout populations and sea run trout populations. We'd like to know what's going on in these rivers. We've got guys who hunt ducks from these rivers and that sort of thing. So Justin Sankey from URI, who is shown here, came down to Mashpee in June. We visited the Santuit River first, which is in these pictures here, and Justin put out some PFAS testing equipment in the river, and then we traveled across town over to the Quashnet and did the exact same thing. From there, we also decided that those pieces of equipment are going to be in the water for about 2 weeks, and we'll be testing the PFAS levels again in those rivers. While that was happening, we also came up this summer with another plan to have POH camp, or Preserving Our Homelands Camp Part 2, with the folks at URI. But this time we visited them in Rhode Island, stayed a couple of days and a couple of nights in some of the dorms with some of the kids. So again, it was a nice mixture of classroom teachings, as you can see here, and also some pretty cool outdoor activities, which are also indicated on this slide here. So the first year that they were involved with our camp, again, it was the kids learned about bioaccumulation again and how PFAS goes through the system. This time they switched out the curriculum a little bit to keep it fresh, and the kids learned more about PFAS risk in the household. And it's really eye-opening for folks who don't realize what their risk is on a daily basis, whether it's in microwave popcorn packaging or in the clothes that you're wearing. And the kids were able to learn this. And the thing that we tell our kids every day after camp is go home and tell your parents what you learned today. Every day we do that, no matter what they've learned, because very often there's a very good chance your parents don't know what you learned today. And it's good to pass that knowledge along. And one of the activities that we had in one of their buildings on campus was a scavenger hunt, where they had gone ahead and placed some items throughout the building, and kids were supposed to identify whether that particular item had PFAS. And if they were right and they picked it up, there was like a tag to indicate that they were correct. It was really fun, really educational opportunity. Kids loved it, and they've really, really learned a lot. And some people might say, well, PFAS is kind of boring, and it's so scientific. How does it translate to the kids? And as I was telling Emily, we have on the final day of our camp, we have the campus do presentations, and they can present on anything that they've learned the 5 weeks prior, anything that they enjoyed, whatever it is that they want to talk about. And the presentation is done in front of our science partners who help us through the 5 weeks, and also their families. And the kids are allowed to team up and partner up, so there could be 2 or 3 kids that do the same presentation together. So I think this year we had about 10 presentations, and out of the 10, 4 of them were based strictly on PFAS. So these kids are really starting to learn what PFAS are, what the risks are, and it's great to see. They're really interested in, and kudos to the URI and STEEP staff for making the information relatable and fun, because really, when it comes to this kind of stuff, you could just gloss over. So big shout out to them and to our kids who are learning more about this every single day. It's been fantastic. So again, just about every year, right? We think about renewing this partnership and this relationship, and again, we talk about different things. What's important to the tribe? What are you guys looking for? And so, each year we're progressing. It went from fish sampling to now we're thinking, okay, well, you know what? The tribe has a 12-acre aquaculture grant out in Wampanoag Bay, where we grow quahogs and oysters. They're either for resale, or we also give them to the community members. Wouldn't it be interesting to know, is there PFAS contamination in the water on that grant? What do the fish that we're eating look like? So again, Justin Sankey from Rhode Island came down probably about a couple weeks ago now. That's us out on Wampanoag Bay. We visited our aquaculture grant. We put out more PFAS sensors. which would stay in the water for 2 weeks. And then as a follow-up, Justin would come back this week, actually. No, I'm sorry, I apologize. Last week, he collected those samples and at the same time took core and sediment samples from Papaneset Bay, right from the grant, to basically see what was in the mud, because that's where these fish grow. And we also took samples of the fish that were growing on our grant. So we took 30 quahogs at a particular size. I think they were 1.5 inch. We took 30 quahogs that were at 2.5 inch, and then we did the same exact thing for oysters. Then we drove across town and went over to Waquoit Bay and did the same exact thing. And Waquoit Bay is important to the tribe because that's where a lot of our guys commercial fish. So it's really important to us. This is where we've got a tribal member that's on one of these waterways just about every day fishing. And again, we have our aquaculture site here. So this information that we gather is going to be extremely relevant, not just, to the community and our tribal members, but, to our internal organization here, because this is something that we're growing for consumption, not only for the general public, but for our tribal members. So we're really eager to see what that data produces and to get those results. And finally, again, we're always looking for more creative ways to engage and to progress this relationship and this partnership. It just so happens that tomorrow evening, URI and STEEP will be on our agenda of our Natural Resources Commission meeting. They'll be zoomed in, and we'll be talking to the members about the work that we've been doing up to this point and trying to get ideas from these folks, most of whom are commercial fishermen, about what are their concerns, what are their knowledge, and how can we continue to pass this message along and to educate our tribal members as to what some of the risks are. And this other picture just is an example of some previous community engagement events where we had some folks come in and talk at one of our elders lunch and learns, and perhaps maybe even an elders talking circle. So you can hopefully I've shown how this relationship has grown from the very beginning, and how a lot of our tribal members are becoming educated and aware and know what their risks are. It's been a great partnership, and I'm so happy to be involved with it, and I've learned a lot myself, and really can't wait to see where this takes us. I would imagine we're going to be doing this for quite some time. So again, thank you for your time.
That was great, Jason. Thank you so much. And I'd say the learning has gone both ways. I've certainly learned a lot from you and from other members of the tribe as well. So thanks for being a great partner for our work. And during the Q&A, I hope we can dive in a little bit more into sort of the elements of a successful partnership. So thank you for all of that. Now I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Emily Diamond. She's an associate professor of communication studies and marine affairs at the University of Rhode Island. Her research focuses on how to more effectively message environmental information, and specifically how identities and place attachment inform and shape individuals' responses to environmental information. Dr. Diamond received her PhD in environmental policy from Duke University in 2019, and she also has a professional background in strategic communication consulting and public relations. And it's been great working with you, Emily, to co-lead the Community Engagement Corps for STEEP for a few years now.
Thanks so much, Laurel. All right, let's see if I can have better luck sharing.
That's a low blow, Emily.
It's all just I see it all as luck at this point.
All right, looks great.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Laurel, and thank you, Jason, for that wonderful overview. That was a great introduction to some of the work that we've been doing. So I'm going to give a little bit more background on our partnership, how STEEP has been engaging with the tribe on the Cape as part of our community engagement, our targeted community engagement on Cape Cod. And then I'm going to, I am a communication scholar, so I'm going to talk about some of the risk communication work that we've been doing to kind of study how best to convey information about PFAS to the tribal community in particular, and hopefully, mitigate their risk of exposure to PFAS. So just a bit of background. Why is Steep working with the tribe? Well, besides the fact that the tribe is an incredibly important community member on Cape Cod. Their tribal lands on Cape Cod and in and around the Mashpee area are in a bit of a vulnerable position when it comes to PFAS contamination. They are downstream from a couple different known sources of PFAS contamination. So this map on the right shows various different sources of PFAS across the Cape. The red is public water supplies that have in the past had PFAS contamination, and you'll see that the star there is where the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Council, the government center is, and it's right kind of downstream from a lot of sources of PFAS on Cape Cod. Another reason why this is a particularly important community to work with here is that the tribal community members, the Mashpee Wampanoag, consuming and fishing and collecting fish and shellfish are really important both to their culture as well as to food security. And it is a major source of food for many members in the community. There's a strong reliance on local fish and shellfish and consuming that. And we do know that, consuming fish and animals from who live in PFAS contaminated waterways could increase your exposure to PFAS. So we felt like this was a particularly important community to work with. We also had heard, as Jason alluded to, concerns around the prevalence of illness in the community, high cancer rates, things like that, which could be linked to a number of different causes, but cancer is one risk associated with PFAS exposure. So we definitely wanted to partner with this community and help share information about PFAS to reduce risks. We have done, so I joined this partnership and we've been working with Jason for the past, 3 or 4 years. Before that, with the partnership of Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition and Cheryl Osimo, Steep had done some engagement work with the tribe, a film screening in 2018 that was quite successful with the tribal community. So since then, we have been partnering with the tribe for a couple different main aims and activities. So the first thing we wanted to do in this version of STEEP is to understand how the tribal community viewed and understood PFAS, if at all, and what kind of their risk perceptions and main concerns were. We also wanted to help out with some fish and shellfish testing. I'll talk about a little bit, but Jason's already alluded to a lot of that work that's already been done to try to give the tribal community a better picture of how they might be exposed to PFAS through different pathways. Based on this understanding of community risk perceptions, we are developing tailored communication strategies to reduce the risk and doing a number of different community engagement and education activities. Jason did a great job going over some of our biggest activities over the past several years, and we're really excited about continuing these. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into some of our results was the intentional way that we took on this research partnership with the tribe. There is a lot of not wonderful history when it comes to Western scientists and Western researchers engaging with tribal communities and doing research on tribal communities as opposed to with tribal communities. There's been, concerns and accusations of exploitation and really just not an equal representation, equal footing of both the researchers and the tribal communities. And so we wanted to make sure to not come into the community in that way and to really make this a joint collaboration. We wanted this to be a community-driven research project. And what that means is that our research questions, our priorities are determined by the priorities of the tribal community. It's not us researchers coming in and saying, oh, we want to test this, this, and this. It's us coming in, setting up these meetings, listening to the members of the community, hearing what's important to them, and what their priorities are. And this has driven our choices of what kinds of fish and shellfish to sample, our choices of what kinds of messages to send and how and through whom. So that was a really important component. We also are trying our hardest to make the outcomes of our research as accessible as possible to the tribal community, but also to the broader community. These webinars are a great example of how we're trying to do that. We also work really hard on translating all of our findings in accessible ways, whether that's through really brief, short publications, 2-pagers, whether that's setting up a table at a tribal event and having conversations with people to answer their questions about their food sources, about their exposure, etc. And it was also really important for us that this is a fair and collaborative partnership. And a large concern around researchers coming into tribal communities in the past has been around what happens to the data that is collected. And it was very important to us that the tribe maintain ownership of any data that is collected directly from tribal community members. And so we established URI's first data sharing and ownership agreement with a tribal government. And so this is an official legal document that our lawyers worked very hard on, but it basically establishes what happens to all the data that we collect, that the tribe maintains ownership of this data. They are allowing us as the researchers to use it, but at the end of the project, it returns back to the tribe. So one of the first things that we did that Jason alluded to is we wanted to get an understanding of how people in the tribal community are thinking about and understanding PFAS. So we did 25 focus groups and interviews, talked to 25 tribal members with an emphasis on individuals who fish or shellfish. And then we did a community-wide online survey. We got 155 tribal member responses to that. And we were asking questions about PFAS awareness, how important fishing and shellfishing is to the tribal cultural identity, experiences that these individuals had with prior instances of contamination, how they responded to that, as well as their communication preferences, how they like to receive information on scientific topics. So I'm just going to go briefly over a couple of our key findings. We actually just got a paper accepted, co-authored with Laurel and Jason and a few of our students at the journal Science Communication that will be coming out soon. But I'll just give you a brief preview of some of our findings. About half of survey participants had heard of PFAS before, but they weren't very familiar with it. Only about 22% were very or extremely familiar. And in our interviews, we heard this as well. Although people may have heard of PFAS, there wasn't a lot of understanding about what it is, what its risks are, or how to avoid it. So we saw this as a prime area of kind of education and engagement and information sharing. We also heard that people were concerned mostly about the uncertainties around PFAS, its impacts, as well as its prevalence in the local environment in fish and shellfish, right? We heard a lot of concern and uncertainty and uneasiness because there just had not been a lot of clear information about what PFAS was and how it might be affecting them, right? We heard a lot of concern, the quote there, "I'm concerned for my kids and their children. Is it going to harm us? Are we going to get cancer from this?" We just heard a lot of questions from this initial data collection. We also heard how important being able to continue gathering local fish and shellfish and consuming local fish and shellfish is to members of the tribal community. They really viewed it as a threat to their tribal identity. 76% said that their tribal identity depends on the consumption of local fish and shellfish. Almost half of the survey respondents eat local fish multiple times a week. Usually they get it from family members or other tribal fishermen who share the food. And also, interestingly, we heard a very strong reliance on physical markers of contamination to determine whether or not fish or shellfish that they're catching is safe. So using their senses to try to understand whether they could or should be eating certain fish. And this is potentially problematic for PFAS because it is invisible, right? We cannot see PFAS contamination. We cannot see when animals or fish are contaminated with PFAS. So this is something that could be an issue or a layer of concern in communicating with the tribal community. In terms of how we should share this information, we really heard that on topics like this, people in the tribal community, they want to hear from the tribal fishermen, they want to hear from the tribal government, and they want to hear from the tribal elders. That's where they go to seek information about these topics. They do trust scientists, but they want to see an integration of Western science with Indigenous knowledge. So I think it's really wonderful how Jason and the team, the NRD team, puts together the Preserving Our Homeland summer camp, where they really do a great job winding together both Western science and Indigenous knowledge. And we also heard a strong desire to build testing capacity within the tribe, right? They want to be able to use tribal scientists to do some of this testing, which is what we're trying to do with Justin Sankey, and kind of building up capacity of learning how to do this kind of testing. So what we've done with this, this has directly informed our testing. So we've done a few different rounds of fish and shellfish contamination back in 2021. Former STEEP trainee Heidi Picard sampled 114 fish and shellfish from in and around Mashpee, and the locations were driven by the priorities of the tribe. And so we reported back the results to the tribal council. We put together a great little kind of two-pager overview of our results, which was translated in what we hope is a fairly easily accessible way. And we've been talking about these results at different tribal events and meetings as well. So looking ahead, just before I wrap up, we are hoping to continue our collaboration with the tribe. So as Jason mentioned, Justin Sankey, who's on the right there, as well as tribal member Dale Oakley, they're continuing sampling right now. So hopefully we'll have a bunch of new data about potential pathways of exposure for the tribal community very soon. We're working on developing these messaging strategies with tribal input, grounded in tribal identities of how to best get the message out to the tribal community members about how to reduce their exposure to PFAS. We are already connected with tribal youth and thinking about connecting with tribal elders as those messengers. So as Jason mentioned, the youth are a great way to get messages and information back to their parents. And we will be continuing to do different events. So the Honor the Earth Fair is always a popular one. We've had booths at the powwow and other kinds of events, locking in, building on other tribal community events where we can continue to share information about PFAS to reduce overall exposure risk for this community. And that's it. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Emily. And in addition to learning from Jason and the tribal members, I love opportunities like STEEP that are interdisciplinary, because as a physical scientist, I learn a lot from collaborating with social scientists and doing more qualitative research. So it's been great to work with you on the paper and on our other work with the tribe. All right, so we are now transitioning to our Q&A session. We did have a couple questions come in when folks registered, and if you have a question, please do put them in the Q&A. To get us started, this is kind of a question for both of you. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've learned working together, and what information or what approaches might be relevant for other tribe research collaborations. And Jason, maybe ask you to start. And Emily had alluded to the kind of troubled past that some researchers have had in tribal communities. So I was curious if your tribe has been involved with any research before, and what advice would you give to researchers who are either actively collaborating or possibly going to collaborate in the future with tribal members?
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. The history is definitely troubled. You're right, and a lot of Native communities are resistant to outsiders coming in, and especially when it comes to Western science, and uh, saying that they're there on behalf of the tribe. That's not necessarily always the case, and hasn't always necessarily been the case over time. Um, what's been great about this relationship? If you had to write a how-to book of how to come into a tribal community and engage with the tribal community, I think we've probably touched on every single chapter of that. From the very beginning, it's been a very respectful relationship. You folks have come into the community and gotten to know our community members. It's not just been the NRD department. You've gotten into the community, you've met with our child members one-on-one, and you've come to all of our community events as well. So there's that level of trust that you've been able to build over these last 3 years of people just seeing your faces and being used to you and trusting you, which has been extremely important. Um, and Emily touched on this a little bit in her presentation too. When it comes to respecting Indigenous knowledge as well, right? It really does and should go hand in hand with Western science. There is knowledge that's in this community that isn't in any books anywhere. So no matter what your degree of education is, there is education in this community from someone who may have only graduated high school that you don't have access to. And it's important to listen to those folks, to get their stories, and to respect those stories. Very often in the past, and up until recently, most of this it's been like an extractive relationship where folks come into your community, they gain knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and then they just take that with them, and then go on their own way and apply it to their research or what have you. And that has not been the case with you folks. You guys have been very respectful of our fishermen, as well as our tribal elders. And one thing I would like to mention that Emily touched on, I know she said the data sharing agreement was the first for URI. It was the first for myself as well. And she made a little hint that there was a lot of back and forth on that document, and there was. The tribe had certain concerns with it, and we went back and they very respectfully listened to those concerns. We came up with a document that everyone felt comfortable with. And what's great is that, again, the data is ours. You're recognizing our sovereignty, right? That information is ours, and it should be ours to stay in this community, and not to benefit anyone outside of the community. So we don't feel like we're being used. We feel like you guys are really in this to help educate us, to help us learn, and to help us mitigate our risk. And it's been a very collaborative process. So if anyone is listening or anyone wants to approach a tribal community, I mean, I think look no further than this particular project here. We have no complaints from our end.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And it goes both ways, Jason, on your end, being a great partner and being receptive to learning together with us about this really complicated topic. Emily, did you want to add anything about suggestions or approaches for other teams?
Yeah, so one of the terms that I put out there in my presentation that we've really been trying to drive ourselves towards is for this to be a community-driven research project. And there's a lot of scholarship out there right now of scholarship on community engaged research and how to do it well, and really trying to be more community driven as opposed to just community interfacing or community engaged. And what that means to me is that the research questions are coming from the community, right? We are partnering with the community on every level to try to understand what are their concerns and how can we address those concerns, and how can we address those concerns with research. And it's been a really great learning process. I would say that we've been in a good position in STEEP because we are a long-term grant. So we're now in our overall with our renewal, we're I think in our 9th year of funding from NIEHS, which is fabulous, and that's really an opportunity, a research opportunity that many people do not get. Most federal grants even are in the 2, 3, 4 year amount of time. And frankly, that is just not enough time to establish a community-driven research project. And so one of the things that I've learned through this process is how important it is that we identify and prioritize long-term sources of funding if we actually want to see community-driven research happening. Because we spent, the first several years of the STEEP grant just trying to make the connections with the community and make sure that we are reflecting what their priorities were and that we know who they are and they know who we are. And that takes a really long time. I think a lot of funders give money and expect you, at the beginning of year one to be on the ground doing the research in the communities. And that's just not how you do good community-driven research. So we've been very privileged with STEEP because we've had so long to be able to develop this relationship. And I just hope that other funders continue to understand the importance of that.
Great, thanks for that answer. I thought this was a good question. I'll point this one to you, Jason. Could someone please provide an example of how Western science is combined with tribal knowledge? One person who wrote the question is not sure what this means and would love an example.
Yeah, I mean, just in general terms, if you want to say study a particular area or find out patterns ecologically or learn about coastal erosion and wetlands and marshes and what's happening with storms, who better to ask than the people who've been on those lands and have relied on those lands and used the lands and the resources for 10,000 years. We've seen climate change in very many forms over the years, right? We've seen it all. We've seen ice ages. We've seen drought. We are at a point where some of us can predict weather patterns because we just sensed and are so in tune with our land that that knowledge when you're in a certain region for that long, and I'm not talking about us being able to tell you what's happening in Pennsylvania or anything like that, but we're in a very, very small geographical region and have been for 10,000 years. If we aren't allowed or able to tell you how things are being affected, uh I don't know who better to speak to that. So we've got guys who will take you down to the bay, and they can give you 50 years of anecdotal information on what that bay used to look like, and what it looks like now, and what fish used to be in that body of water that are no longer there, and probably even tell you why they're not there. And you got guys who will take you out and they'll tell you that they used to be able to get scallops by the bushel in Wacoit Bay, and we know now that the reason they're not there is because there's no eelgrass, which has been caused by degraded sediment and warming water temperatures. And until that comes back, we're not going to see scallops again. So we were so reliant at one point, and still are many of us, on the land and what it had to give us, that we were just so in tune with it that we have a familiarity with it that just a lot of people don't.
Great, thanks for that answer. This was a question that came in during registration for the event today. Hyannis area ponds have high PFAS levels, likely due to secondary contamination from sites at the airport and the former fire training academy. So the person is wondering if the state or the town is responsible for posting fish consumption advisories, and bigger question of whether they work. And just to kick off an answer to the question, the Department of Public Health does develop fish consumption advisories, and there have long been advisories for mercury, also some for PCBs, and more recently the state has developed advisories based on PFAS as well. And we'll put in the chat the link if you wanted to look up any local water bodies of concern for you. And then it's the town that has the responsibility for putting up signs related to the fish consumption advisories. But I did want to ask some components of this to both of our speakers. So Emily, I'm curious, what did you learn through your interviews and surveys with tribal members about their attitudes towards fish consumption advisories?
Yeah, so we did talk about this in our interviews and got some really interesting findings, some mixed attitudes, right? On the one hand, some people we talked to, they said they absolutely listen to the fish advisories. That's where they go first for information about where they could and should be fishing and consuming fish from. But an important thing to mention is I also did hear some sentiments of this being difficult to disentangle from tribal experiences around preserving and maintaining their Aboriginal land rights. So the land rights that the tribal members have to fish and collect shellfish from waterways, even if they have to cross private property to do so. And so we did hear from some fishermen that they feel like they didn't necessarily trust the motivations of the closures, right? So when they saw a closure, given the really difficult past that they've had around maintaining and fighting for these Aboriginal land rights, they didn't know whether the closures were actually due to contamination or a further effort to try to limit where people can collect fish and shellfish. So I think that attitudes are mixed, and there's a lot of kind of complex background here that motivates how people are responding to those advisories.
Great, thanks for that, Emily. And Jason, I know there are some fish consumption advisories for some of the ponds on the Upper Cape, like Ashumet and John's Pond. I'm curious what you've heard from other members of the tribe about their perceptions and maybe their likelihood of following posted advisories.
Laura, I can tell you when it comes to Ashumet Pond and John's Pond in particular, I don't know of many tribal members at all who fish in those ponds anymore. And it's been a while. Those two ponds, as you know, are extremely close to the military base. And there have been concerns on those ponds going back to the 1980s, even when I was a kid. And most of our ponds, even Mashpee Pond and Santua Pond, are having their own issues in different ways with algae blooms. So when it comes to freshwater fish consumption, I got to say it's way down. If there's an advisory in saltwater, it is a little iffy, and there are some concerns that Emily just alluded to, without getting too deep into that. But there have been some issues out on our aquaculture grant about folks who have been wanting to take over a portion of our grant, and there are some folks who think that maybe sort of behind the scenes, maybe there are some fish advisories that are going up in a certain area to conditionally close the area, and maybe even shut it down permanently. And those are just some of the concerns that might be happening in the bays.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Jason. And staying with you, there's a kind of related question. Is PFAS contamination of river herring part of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe's Right of Nature campaign?
It didn't start that way, but as we have learned more about it, we're going to probably start incorporating that. The whole intent of the rights of nature movement from the very beginning was, in a tribal community, the finfish, the game animals, they're your relations, and you rely on them. And the purpose of the rights of nature movement is we identified this particular fish, the herring, as being at risk. And just like you would if it was your aunt or your grandmother, if they were not doing well, you would do your best to try and fix that and make them feel better, and thrive. And part of the rights of herring movement that is being spearheaded by our native environmental ambassadors here in Mashpee is not only to improve the conditions for the herring, including fish passage. We're now looking, as we're starting to learn more about PFAS exposure, whether that is part of the problem.
Great question and great answer. Thank you. Question for you, Emily. It's a little bit for people who are doing research. When we think about doing research that involves people, that research is protected by an institutional review board, the IRB. And so someone is asking a question: if participants are protected by an IRB, what does STEEP share with the tribe, and how will we handle any parts of the data that are personally identifiable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so a part of our data sharing and ownership agreement covers that. And so basically, any personally identifiable information in the data will be redacted before it is handed back over to the tribe, so that we can protect the confidentiality of that data.
Got it. Oh, and I'm just seeing you had an unanswered question here in the chat. I'm looking at too many different screens here. Thanks for that answer. And yes, sticking with you for a second, Emily, I know you've thought a lot about risk communication for your other research. Could you talk a little bit about how you'll apply what you've learned from the surveys and the interviews on the Cape to develop messaging related to PFAS for tribal members?
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to understand is, going into this, I guess one of our hypotheses was that if you take the traditional public health approach of just telling people, do not consume this fish, it might have PFAS contamination that could elevate your personal levels. Um, how is that going to conflict with people's the importance of that practice to their identity and their cultural identity? And we did find that being able to continue to consume these fish is such a core part of so many of these tribal members' cultural identities. It's how they practice their culture, it's their history, and they really could people said that they could not imagine being a Mashpee Wampanoag without being able to consume, to do this fishing and shellfishing and consuming that. So that was important for us to understand baseline, and then we can now build off of that. So instead of just saying do not eat any fish, right? What can we point them to that could lower their potential PFAS intake, right? So through the great sampling and fish testing that we've been able to do on Steep, we have a better idea of which areas, which rivers, which ponds have higher levels of PFAS versus lower levels of PFAS in the fish and shellfish, as well as which species have higher levels. So that's if you're curious, that's the report that we've linked to in the chat. Can give some more information about that. So we can point tribal members to different sources as well as species of local fish and shellfish to consume. And we also, a really important part of risk communication is thinking about sources of information and who are the best communicators and what are the best channels to get information out. So we've been able to collect that information, right? As I mentioned, hearing information from the tribal elders, from the tribal fishermen, from the tribal government is really going to be a successful way to get the information out. I think Jason's approach of let's educate the kids and have them tell their parents, I think is also going to be a really successful approach in this community. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about that are guiding our decisions about how we're going to engage and communicate with this community.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I think we're kind of coming down the home stretch here in terms of time. There's more questions to be answered. There was a question about how the provision of education has changed tribal members' actions with regards to limiting exposure. And I think that's something that we'll learn about over time. I know we're going to do a follow-up survey with tribal members, so we'll get a sense of, changes in behaviors and attitudes potentially over time. I think the last question, I'll have to be a little bit brief. For you, Jason, I'm wondering if you know of any PFAS work that's being done with tribal farms.
I don't know of any, Laurel, but this has been a discussion that's come up amongst our group about, next steps. And we do have a farm here in Mashpee, as you know, where we do grow vegetables. And some of the discussion from our end has been for soil testing. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that right here in Mashpee as well. But I'm not aware of anyone else that's doing it. I'm sure it's happening. I'm just not aware.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll mention that there's a tribal PFAS working group, which is part of the National Tribal Water Council. And so they do have a website. So that might be another avenue to look into to see if there's other types of research in other parts of the country. So we do have some more questions here, but we're really kind of winding down here. I think there's a question about PFAS blood testing, and I know we had an earlier question as well come in during registration about someone who had high blood levels. And as of now, that's not something that we've done specifically with the tribe. We do have a different study at Silent Spring that's looked at Hyannis, which is another community on the Cape where there used to be high levels in the water. But I think that would be a discussion we'd have with Jason and the tribe if that's the type of testing that people in the tribe might be interested in. So I think that's an important question. So I would love to keep answering questions, but I do want to respect people's time. So I'm going to just kind of wind us down here. We would love to hear what you think. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to fill out our evaluation survey. You can access it here in the QR code. We'll also drop a link in the chat, and we'll have an email that we send out to all the attendees today. So please do take a few moments, because we want this to be as informative to everyone as possible. If you missed some of our previous webinars, you can access all of them on the Steep website. And if you came late, you can catch this one online as well. And then our next webinar will be next month on Wednesday, November 12th, and we're going to be talking about PFAS health effects. Thank you again, Emily and Jason, for a great discussion today. And thanks to all of you for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.